The distress signal. The room was silent except for the faint hum of machinery. Captain Marcus Kane, a decorated officer of Earth's Special Forces of the Void, stood in front of the control panel aboard the Eclipse. He was used to the quiet. It was the calm before the storm. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a sound that sent a chill through everyone on the bridge. A crackling, desperate voice calling out for help. "This is Ambassador Velen of the Veloxian Republic. Our worlds are under attack. Please, anyone who can hear this, help us. The Zorath Collective is unstoppable. We cannot hold them back." The voice faded into static, leaving the crew stunned. Kane's second-in-command, Lieutenant Sarah Hayes, exchanged a nervous glance with him. The Zorath Collective was a name whispered in fear across the galaxy. They were conquerors, merciless, and efficient. If they were attacking the Veloxians, it meant annihilation. "Run a trace," Kane ordered. His voice was calm, but there was a steel edge to it. Lieutenant Hayes nodded, her fingers flying across the console. Within moments, a star map appeared on the main screen. "Signals coming from Sector 14, near the Veloxian border," she said. "But, Captain, that's deep in Zorath-controlled space." A murmur spread among the crew. Everyone knew what that meant. Venturing into Zorath space was a death sentence. Their technology, numbers, and ruthlessness made them nearly unbeatable. Kane crossed his arms, his eyes fixed on the map. "How long ago was this sent?" 6 hours, sir," Hayes replied. "If we go now, we might make it in time." The crew stared at Kane, waiting for his decision. He could feel the weight of their gazes. As captain, he had to balance the safety of his team with the responsibility of answering a plea for help. He knew what Earth's high command would say. Stay out of it. Humanity had fought hard to carve its place in the galaxy, and picking a fight with the Zorath would risk everything. But Kane wasn't one to ignore a cry for help. "We're going," he said, his voice firm. "Set a course for Sector 14. The crew sprang into action, though some hesitated. Kane didn't blame them. Fear was a natural reaction when facing the unknown. Still, he knew they trusted him, and that was enough. As the Eclipse roared to life, Kane addressed the team over the intercom. "I know what you're thinking. This mission is dangerous, maybe even suicidal. But this is who we are. We don't turn our backs on those who need us. We're humanity's best, and if anyone can make a difference, it's us." The ship jumped into hyperspace, leaving Earth's borders far behind. Hours later, the Eclipse dropped out of hyperspace near a dying star. The region was eerily quiet, with no sign of life or activity. The signal had led them here, but something felt off. "Scanners aren't picking up any Veloxian ships," Hayes reported. "No debris, no energy signatures. It's like they vanished." "Keep scanning," Kane ordered, his eyes narrowing. "Something's not right." Suddenly, alarms blared across the bridge. Hayes looked up, her face pale. Multiple contacts inbound. Zorath ships. Kane's stomach tightened. "How many?" "Too many," Hayes whispered. The screen lit up with red blips, dozens of Zorath vessels closing in fast. They'd walked straight into a trap. "Battle stations," Kane shouted. The crew scrambled as the Eclipse's weapons systems powered up. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're not going down without a fight." The first wave of enemy fire hit their shields, shaking the ship violently. Kane gripped the console to steady himself. "Return fire. Target their lead ships." The Eclipse's cannons roared to life, blasting through the void. One Zorath ship exploded in a fiery burst, but it wasn't enough. More ships swarmed in, overwhelming their defenses. "We can't hold this position, Captain," Hayes shouted over the chaos. "They're everywhere." Kane's mind raced. Retreat was the only option. But the Zorath ships were too fast. They'd never outrun them in open space. Then an idea hit him, a risky, desperate idea. "Hayes, plot a course through the asteroid field," he commanded. The crew froze, staring at him like he'd lost his mind. The asteroid field was dense, unpredictable, and dangerous. But Kane's eyes burned with determination. Do it now. With no other choice, Hayes complied. The Eclipse veered sharply, heading straight for the jagged rocks of the asteroid field. Zoref ships followed, firing relentlessly. The Eclipse weaved through the asteroids, dodging both enemy fire and deadly collisions. The Zoreth ships weren't as lucky. One by one, they crashed into the rocks, exploding into debris. Shields at 40%. Hayes reported. We're not gonna make it. Sir. We will, Kane said, gripping the controls. We have to. Finally, the Eclipse emerged from the asteroid field, battered but intact. The remaining Zoreth ships broke off pursuit, unable to follow. The bridge erupted in cheers, but Kane remained serious. This was only the beginning. The distress signal had been a trap, but who had sent it? And why? As the crew worked to repair the ship, Kane stared out into the void. Somewhere out there, the Veloxians were waiting for help, and Kane wasn't about to let them down. The trap. The Eclipse drifted through the shadow of a dead star, its crew on high alert. Captain Kane stood at the helm, his sharp eyes scanning the dim void on the main screen. The ambush they had barely escaped had left the crew shaken, but Kane knew there was no time to dwell on it. The Veloxians' distress signal was still their mission. Any sign of the source? Kane asked, his voice calm but firm. Lieutenant Hayes shook her head. No signals, no ships, nothing. It's like a ghost sector. Before Kane could respond, the comm system crackled to life again. The same desperate Veloxian voice returned, echoing through the bridge. Please, help us. They're coming back. We won't survive much longer. Hayes froze. Sir, it's the same message. Word for word. It's a loop. Kane's jaw tightened. He turned to the communications officer. Trace it. I want to know exactly where that signal's coming from. As the officer worked, Hayes frowned at her console. Captain, I'm detecting faint energy readings nearby. They're strange. Almost like. Her words were cut off as the ship's lights flickered, plunging the bridge into semi-darkness. Alarms blared, and the crew scrambled to their stations. Status report. Kane barked. Hayes' voice was strained. We've been hit with an energy pulse. It's not from a weapon. It's some kind of disabling field. Engines are down, weapons offline. We're sitting ducks. Kane clenched his fists. Where did it come from? The communications officer looked up, pale. Sir, the signal. It's coming from inside an asteroid cluster just ahead. The tension in the room was palpable. Kane stared at the asteroid cluster on the screen. It was massive, its jagged rocks spinning in chaotic orbits. And now it was clear. This wasn't just a cluster of floating debris. It was a trap. Options, Kane demanded. We could send a probe, Hayes suggested. But if the signal's a trap, they'll know we're watching. Kane shook his head. No time for that. If there's even a chance someone's alive in there, we move now. The crew hesitated, but Kane's determination was contagious. He turned to Chief Engineer Malik. Can you restore the engines? Malik grimaced. I can give you half power in 10 minutes. But weapons and shields? Forget it. We'll be going in blind. Kane nodded. Then we'll improvise. Hayes, plot a course into that cluster. Tight and unpredictable. Let's hope they can't track us in that mess. Hayes hesitated but obeyed, fingers flying across the console. The Eclipse jolted forward, maneuvering carefully into the asteroid cluster. The silence on the bridge was deafening, broken only by the hum of strained systems. As the Eclipse crept deeper into the field, the crew's nerves were stretched to their limits. The massive rocks loomed on all sides, some spinning dangerously close, but Kane's focus never wavered. Then, out of the darkness, something emerged. Contacts, Hayes shouted. Multiple Zorath ships, closing fast. The screen lit up with red blips. Kane's stomach sank. The Zorath had been waiting for them. How many? He demanded. At least 5 frigates. We're no match for them in this condition. Kane's mind raced. Running wasn't an option. Fighting was suicide. He needed another plan, and fast. Hayes, pinpoint the source of that disabling field, he ordered. If we can take it out, we might stand a chance. Hayes worked quickly, sweat beading on her brow. Got it. It's coming from a large asteroid up ahead. But there's no way we can reach it before they intercept us. Kane smirked. We won't have to. Malik, can you rig an EMP from our remaining power? Malik's eyes widened. An EMP, Captain. That'll knock out our systems too. We'll be dead in the water. Kane nodded. I know, but it'll take them out too. If we time it right, we can drift close enough to disable that field before they recover. Malik hesitated, then gave a sharp nod. I'll need 5 minutes. You've got 3, Kane said. The Zorath ships closed in, their weapons charging. The Eclipse shuddered as the first volley struck its hull. Sparks flew and alarms screamed, but Kane kept his voice steady. Malik, status. Almost there. The enemy ships surrounded them, their sleek forms like predators circling prey. Kane could see the crew's fear, but he refused to let it take hold. Brace for impact, Kane yelled. With a deafening hum, Malik's makeshift EMP burst to life. The Eclipse went dark, its systems shutting down completely. For a moment, there was silence. Then the Zorath ships around them flickered and stalled, their engines failing. The Eclipse drifted, powerless, through the chaos. Using only thrusters, they navigated closer to the asteroid, emitting the disabling field. The enemy ships, now as helpless as they were, floated aimlessly. Hayes, Kane said, his voice low. Do we have control of the manual targeting system? Hayes nodded. Barely. But I can give you one clean shot. That's all I need. With painstaking precision, the crew aimed a single torpedo at the asteroid's core. The shot hit dead center, erupting in a massive explosion. The disabling field vanished instantly, and the Eclipse roared back to life. The Zorath ships, still reeling from the EMP, were easy targets. Kane wasted no time. Fire at will. The Eclipse's cannons tore through the enemy frigates, one by one. The crew cheered as the last ship was destroyed, but Kane didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was a warning. The Zorath weren't just hunting the Veloxians. They were hunting anyone who dared to help them. As the Eclipse prepared to move deeper into the sector, Kane stared at the wreckage on the screen. The Zorath's trap had failed, but the real battle was just beginning. Captain, Hayes said quietly. What now? Kane's eyes hardened. We keep going. Someone sent that signal, and we're going to find out who. Allies in the shadows. The Eclipse drifted in the eerie silence of deep space, the faint glow of a distant nebula casting long shadows across the bridge. The crew was still recovering from their narrow escape in the asteroid field. Repairs were underway, but morale was shaky. The Zorath's trap had left scars, both on the ship and the people aboard. Captain Kane sat at the command console, reviewing the data recovered from the wreckage of the Zorath frigates. The remains of their disabling field generator hinted at advanced tech, far beyond what even the most ruthless species should possess. The question gnawed at him. Who or what was backing the Zorath? Captain, Hayes called, breaking his train of thought. I'm picking up a new signal, but it's faint. Kane straightened. Can you pinpoint it? Hayes' brow furrowed as she worked the controls. It's not a distress signal this time. It's encrypted, and it's coming from the same direction we're heading. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Kane leaned forward, his voice calm but commanding. Decrypt it. Let's see what we're dealing with. Minutes passed as Hayes worked. The tension on the bridge was palpable. Finally, the console emitted a sharp beep, and Hayes' eyes widened. It's a message. Short and simple. Follow the shadow. Your answers lie within. Follow the shadow, Kane repeated, frowning. What does that mean? Before anyone could respond, the ship's sensors blared. A massive shadow loomed on the edge of their radar, a ship, but unlike anything they had ever seen. It's not Zoreth, Hayes whispered. I don't recognize the design. And it's cloaked. We're only catching faint outlines. Is it hostile? Kane asked. Hayes shook her head. No weapons detected. It's just watching us. The Eclipse followed the mysterious vessel through the void. It moved gracefully, its shadow blending seamlessly with the blackness of space. The crew's unease grew with every passing moment, but Kane remained focused. If this ship held answers, they couldn't afford to back down. After an hour of silent pursuit, the shadow ship suddenly stopped, hovering over an abandoned mining station on a desolate moon. A message flashed on the Eclipse's screen. Dock and enter. Come unarmed. The bridge erupted into murmurs. Hayes turned to Kane, her expression tense. Captain, this could be a trap. Kane nodded. It could be. But we don't have a choice. We need answers, and whoever they are, they seem to know something about the Zoreth. He stood, his presence commanding silence. Hayes, you're with me. Malik, keep the engines ready in case we need a quick exit. If anything happens, you're in charge. The docking bay of the mining station was eerily quiet as Kane and Hayes stepped onto the metal platform. The air was stale, and the only light came from dim overhead panels flickering intermittently. Ahead, a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall, cloaked Veloxian with piercing silver eyes. You're the ones who survived the Zoreth's trap, the Veloxian said, his voice low and calm. Impressive. Kane didn't flinch. And you're the one who sent the message. The Veloxian nodded. I am Lethar, a former ambassador of the Veloxian Republic, or what's left of it. His voice carried a bitterness that spoke of loss. I've been watching you. You're here because you want to save my people. But if you continue, you'll need more than courage. You'll need allies. And you're offering? Kane asked, his tone cautious. Lethar's gaze hardened. Yes, but first, you need to understand the enemy you're facing. Lethar led them into the station's control room. Holograms flickered to life, displaying images of Zoreth ships, planets reduced to rubble, and something else. A massive structure, pulsing with energy, surrounded by a swarm of ships. What is that? Hayes asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Nexus, Lethar said. A Zoreth superweapon. It's not just designed to destroy planets. It can destabilize entire star systems. And it's powered by stolen Veloxian technology. Kane's jaw tightened. How did they get that technology? Lethar's eyes darkened. Betrayal. A faction within our own government sold us out, hoping to survive by aligning with the Zoreth. They didn't realize the Zoreth have no allies, only slaves and corpses. Kane glanced at Hayes, who looked as grim as he felt. Why are you telling us this now? Because the Nexus isn't operational yet, Lethar said. But it will be soon. If you want to stop the Zoreth, you'll need to destroy it before they bring it online. As the conversation continued, alarms blared from the Eclipse. Kane's communicator buzzed with Malik's frantic voice. Captain, we've got incoming. Zoreth ships, 3 of them. They're closing fast. Lethar's expression darkened. They found us. Kane turned to Hayes. Get back to the ship and prepare for launch. I'll stay with Lethar. Sir. Hayes began to protest, but Kane cut her off. That's an order, Lieutenant. Reluctantly, Hayes nodded and sprinted back to the Eclipse. Kane turned to Lethar. If you have any tricks up your sleeve, now's the time. Lethar smirked. Follow me. As the Zoreth ships descended, Lethar led Kane to a hidden hangar. Inside was a sleek Veloxian fighter craft bristling with experimental technology. This ship was designed to counter the Zoreth, Lether said. It's fast, it's stealthy, and it's deadly. Take it. Use it to destroy the Nexus. Kane hesitated. What about you? Lether's smirk faded. I'll stay behind and delay them. It's the least I can do for my people. Kane extended his hand, and Lether shook it firmly. You're a brave man. So are you, Lether replied. Now go. As Kane returned to the Eclipse, the Veloxian fighter shot out of the hangar, engaging the Zoreth ships in a dazzling display of firepower. Lether's sacrifice bought the Eclipse enough time to escape. Back on the bridge, Hayes looked at Kane. What now, sir? Kane's gaze hardened. We head for the Nexus. If we don't stop that weapon, there won't be anyone left to save. The heart of the Zoreth Empire. The Eclipse moved through the void, a lone spark of resistance in the shadow of an overwhelming enemy. Every moment brought them closer to the Zoreth Nexus, the superweapon that threatened not just the Veloxians, but the balance of the entire galaxy. The crew worked tirelessly to repair the ship's systems, but the tension was palpable. Captain Kane stood on the bridge, staring at the holographic projection of their destination. The Nexus floated in the heart of Zoreth-controlled space, surrounded by defensive fleets and orbital platforms. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a fortress. We've made it this far, Kane said, addressing the crew. But this is where it gets real. The Zoreth will throw everything they've got to protect that monstrosity. We don't have the luxury of hesitation. Lieutenant Hayes stepped forward, her expression grim. Captain, even with full repairs, we can't take on an entire fleet. We'll need more than guts to pull this off. Kane nodded. That's why we're not going in guns blazing. We're going to infiltrate. We'll take out their defenses from the inside. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. The idea of entering the Zoreth stronghold was daunting, but Kane's confidence steadied them. He turned to Chief Engineer Malik. Malik, how's the cloaking module? Kane asked. Operational, but barely, Malik replied. We'll be invisible, but if they detect even a trace of our energy signature, it's over. Then we'll give them nothing to detect, Kane said. Set course for the Nexus. Hayes, prepare an infiltration team. Hours later, the Eclipse hovered at the edge of the Nexus sensor range. The massive structure loomed before them, its spires bristling with weapons and energy conduits. Thousands of ships patrolled the area, their dark hulls glinting like predators in the void. Hayes led the infiltration team to the hangar, where a sleek Veloxian fighter, a gift from Lether, was prepped for the mission. Kane joined them, donning a reinforced exosuit equipped with stealth tech. Captain, are you sure you want to leave this mission yourself? Hayes asked. We can handle it. Kane's gaze was steady. If we fail, the galaxy burns. I'm not asking anyone to take a risk I won't take myself. Hayes nodded, respecting his resolve. The team boarded the fighter and launched into the darkness, weaving through the dense patrols. The cloaking system hummed quietly, masking their presence as they approached the Nexus. The infiltration team landed in a secluded maintenance bay, the fighter nestling behind stacks of cargo crates. The air inside the Nexus was cold and sterile, filled with the hum of machinery and the faint footsteps of Zoreth patrols. We've got 10 minutes to reach the control core, Kane said, his voice low. Stay sharp and follow my lead. The team moved swiftly through the labyrinthine corridors, avoiding detection with their stealth gear. The Zoreth architecture was alien and imposing, with twisting hallways illuminated by an eerie blue glow. Symbols etched into the walls pulsed faintly, as if alive. Captain, Hayes whispered, pointing to a nearby console. I can tap into their system here. It might give us a map of the core. Kane nodded. Do it. Hayes worked quickly, her fingers dancing across the alien interface. Moments later, a holographic map appeared, showing the Nexus's vast interior. The control core was deep within, heavily guarded. But something else caught Kane's eye. A chamber labeled Experimental Zone pulsed red on the map. It was near their current location. "What's in there?" Kane asked. Hayes scanned the data. "It's marked as a research facility. Whatever they're working on, it's classified. But it's drawing a massive amount of power." Kane's instincts flared. "We need to see it. It might be connected to the Nexus." Hayes hesitated but followed his lead. The team diverted to the experimental zone, their movements precise and silent. They reached a large reinforced door, its surface covered in strange runes. Malik stepped forward, his tools in hand. "Give me a minute." The door hissed open, revealing a cavernous chamber filled with glowing tanks. Inside each tank floated a Veloxian, their bodies twisted and altered. Kane's stomach churned as he realized the horrifying truth. These weren't experiments. They were fuel. "They're using living beings to power the Nexus," Hayes said, her voice shaking. "This is genocide on a scale we can't even comprehend." Kane's fists clenched. "We have to destroy this." Before they could act, the chamber filled with the sound of footsteps. Zorath soldiers poured in, their weapons raised. The team was surrounded. "Drop your weapons," a commanding voice snarled. A towering Zorath officer stepped forward, his armor gleaming. "Your interference ends here, human." Kane smirked, his voice defiant. "You're making a mistake. Humans don't go down easily." The Zorath officer sneered. "Your kind is insignificant. Surrender or die." Kane glanced at Hayes, who gave a subtle nod. The team activated their exosuit's combat mode, and chaos erupted. Kane moved like a force of nature, taking down soldiers with precision. Hayes provided cover fire, while Malik hacked into the chamber systems, overloading the tanks. Explosions rocked the chamber as the tanks ruptured, releasing torrents of energy. The Veloxian captives were freed, their frail forms collapsing to the ground. "Fall back," Kane shouted, helping one of the survivors to their feet. The team fought their way out of the chamber, the Zorath soldiers in pursuit. The Nexus trembled as the overloaded energy spread through its conduits. Alarms blared, and the structure's defenses activated. Back aboard the Eclipse, the crew watched in awe as the Nexus flickered, its power grid destabilized. Kane and his team barely made it back, the fighter skidding into the hangar just as the ship jumped to hyperspace. As the crew tended to the rescued Veloxians, Kane stood on the bridge, his expression grim. They had struck a blow against the Zorath, but it wasn't enough. The Nexus still stood, and its superweapon was nearly operational. "Captain," Hayes said quietly, "what's our next move?" Kane's eyes burned with determination. "We end this, no matter what it takes." Betrayal in the ranks. The Eclipse sailed through hyperspace, the faint hum of its engines filling the tense air on the bridge. The crew was exhausted from their daring escape, but their minds were far from at ease. The sight of the Veloxians used as living batteries haunted everyone. What kind of enemy was the Zorath Collective to commit such atrocities? Captain Kane paced the bridge, his mind racing with strategies. Every second brought them closer to their next move, but something gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't shake. "Hayes," he said, turning to his second-in-command, "status on the rescued Veloxians." Hayes checked her console. "They're stable, Captain. Still weak, but they're conscious. We're running tests to make sure they weren't implanted with anything." Kane nodded. "Good. Keep an eye on them. If the Zorath used them as fuel, there's no telling what else they might have done." Before Hayes could respond, the ship lurched violently. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered. The Eclipse dropped out of hyperspace, the stars outside streaking into static pinpoints. "What the hell?" Kane barked. "Malik, report." The chief engineer's voice crackled over the intercom. "We've been pulled out of hyperspace. It's some kind of internal override. I don't know how it's happening." Kane's stomach dropped. An override. That could only mean one thing: sabotage. The Eclipse drifted in open space as Kane called an emergency meeting with his senior officers. The air in the war room was heavy with suspicion. "We have a traitor on board," Kane said bluntly, his voice cutting through the tension. "Someone fed our location to the Zorath during the mission and has now compromised our systems. This isn't a coincidence." The room fell silent. Hayes broke the stillness, her face grim. "Do we know who it is?" Kane shook his head. "Not yet, but whoever they are, they've put us all at risk. I want a full sweep of the ship. Logs, communications, everything. Nobody is above suspicion." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Kane could feel their doubt, their fear. A traitor in their midst was a poison that could destroy them from within. Hours later, Hayes returned to the bridge, her expression unreadable. "Captain, I've reviewed the logs. There's something you need to see." Kane followed her to the tactical station, where she pulled up a recording. The video showed someone sneaking into the engine room, their face obscured by a hood. They worked quickly, installing a device near the hyperspace controls before disappearing into the shadows. "Freeze it," Kane ordered. Hayes paused the video, zooming in on the figure's hand. A small insignia was visible on their sleeve. A Zorath emblem. "That's not possible," Kane said, his voice low. "We don't have anyone aboard wearing Zorath gear." Hayes hesitated. "Unless they're one of the Veloxians." The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. Kane gathered his officers in the medbay, where the rescued Veloxians were being treated. The leader of the group, a frail woman named Alina, looked up as Kane approached. "Captain," she said weakly, her voice trembling, "you saved us. We owe you our lives." Kane's expression was hard. "One of you sabotaged my ship. We found a device planted in our engine room, and the saboteur was wearing Zorath insignia." "Care to explain?" Alina's eyes widened in shock. "That's not possible. We've been prisoners, used as power sources. Why would any of us betray you?" "That's what I want to know," Kane said. "I need the truth, Alina. If we're going to stop the Zorath, I can't have a traitor on my ship." Before Alina could respond, one of the other Veloxians lunged forward. His face twisted with fury, and in his hand was a hidden blade. "You should have stayed out of this, human," he snarled. Kane reacted instinctively, catching the attacker's wrist and twisting it hard. The blade clattered to the floor as security officers subdued the Veloxian. The medbay erupted into chaos. "Get him to the brig," Kane barked. He turned back to Alina, who was pale with shock. "Did you know about this?" Alina shook her head vehemently. "I swear, Captain, I had no idea. He must have been working for the Zorath all along." Kane's jaw tightened. If there's one, there could be more. "Hayes, double the security on every deck. I want this ship locked down." The captured Veloxian refused to speak, even under interrogation. But the device he planted in the engine room revealed a chilling truth. It was designed to transmit the Eclipse's location to the Zorath fleet. "They're hunting us," Hayes said as she examined the device in the war room. "Every move we make, they'll know." Kane leaned over the table, his fists clenched. "Not if we turn the tables." Hayes looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" Kane's eyes burned with determination. "We'll feed them false information. Let them think we're retreating to a safe zone. When they come after us, we'll ambush them." "That's a big risk," Captain A said. "What if they see through it?" "They won't," Kane said, "because we'll make it convincing. And when the Zorath fleet shows up, we'll make them regret ever underestimating us." As the Eclipse prepared to execute Kane's plan, the mood aboard the ship shifted. The crew worked tirelessly, their fear replaced with resolve. They knew the stakes now. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for every species the Zorath sought to enslave. In the brig, the captured Veloxian smirked as he sat in his cell. "You think you've won, human. The Zorath are unstoppable. You're just prolonging the inevitable." Kane stood outside the cell, his expression cold. "You think so? Let's see how unstoppable they are when we blow their fleet out of the sky." The Veloxian's smirk faltered as Kane walked away, his voice ringing with quiet determination. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. Humanity's resolve. The Eclipse hovered in the shadow of a desolate moon, the crew holding their breath as the trap was set. The plan was simple, but its success depended on perfect timing and flawless execution. Captain Kane stood on the bridge, his gaze locked on the holographic projection of their baited trap. "Lieutenant Hayes," Kane said, his voice steady, "is the decoy signal transmitting?" "Yes, Captain," Hayes replied. "The Zorath fleet will think we've set up a temporary base in the Vega Nebula." "It's the perfect lure." Kane nodded. "Good. They'll come running, and when they do, we'll be ready." Around him, the crew moved with quiet determination. The betrayal from within had shaken them, but it had also strengthened their resolve. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting back. Hours later, the Eclipse drifted in the dense clouds of the Vega Nebula, its cloaking systems masking its presence. Around them, drones scattered through the area projected false energy readings, simulating a small fleet. To the Zorath, it would look like an easy target. "They're here," Hayes announced, her voice cutting through the tension. On the screen, Zorath ships began emerging from hyperspace, their sleek, black forms cutting through the swirling nebula. One by one, they appeared, frigates, cruisers, and even a dreadnought. Kane's jaw tightened. "That's a lot of firepower." "Too much," Hayes added, frowning. "It's more than we expected." Kane leaned forward. "They're overcommitting. They think they've got us cornered. That arrogance will be their downfall." The Zorath ships moved into formation, their weapons systems scanning for signs of the human fleet. Kane watched as the enemy ships drew closer to the decoy drones. "Wait for it," Kane said, his voice low. The tension on the bridge was palpable. The Zorath dreadnought fired the first volley, targeting what it believed to be a cluster of human ships. The energy beams ripped through the nebula, but instead of striking solid targets, they hit empty space. The drones scattered, their illusion breaking apart. "They're confused," Hayes said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Good," Kane replied. "Let's keep it that way. Malik, bring the EMP mines online." Hidden among the drones, a network of EMP mines powered up, their signals perfectly masked. As the Zorath fleet moved deeper into the nebula, the mines activated, releasing massive bursts of electromagnetic energy. The smaller Zorath ships faltered first, their systems flickering and shutting down. "Their shields are down," Hayes shouted. "We've got an opening." Kane's voice was sharp and decisive. "All units, engage." From the clouds of the nebula, a dozen human stealth ships decloaked, their weapons blazing. The Eclipse led the charge, its cannons ripping through the vulnerable Zorath frigates. Explosions lit up the darkness as one enemy ship after another was obliterated. The Zorath fleet regrouped quickly, their larger ships moving to protect the dreadnought. Kane knew the real challenge was just beginning. "Target their cruisers," Kane ordered. "We need to thin their numbers before we go after the dreadnought." The Eclipse weaved through the chaos, dodging enemy fire as it unleashed devastating volleys. The human fleet fought with precision, their maneuvers coordinated and ruthless. The Zorath, despite their overwhelming firepower, were struggling to adapt to the humans' unorthodox tactics. "They're trying to flank us," Hayes warned. "Let them," Kane replied. "Malik, activate the decoy beacons." Across the battlefield, small devices deployed by the human ships emitted false signals, drawing the Zorath away from the core of the fleet. As the enemy ships chased ghosts, the humans struck with deadly efficiency. Despite their success, the battle was far from over. The Zorath dreadnought loomed in the distance, its massive guns charging. Kane could feel the weight of its presence like a storm waiting to break. "Captain," Hayes said, her voice tense, "if that dreadnought fires, it'll take out half our fleet." Kane nodded grimly. "We'll stop it." "Hayes, Prepare the Eclipse for a direct assault." The crew froze, staring at him in shock. "Sir," Malik said, his voice hesitant, "you're not seriously suggesting we go head-to-head with that thing?" Kane's gaze was steely. "We don't have a choice. If we don't take it out, everything we've done here will mean nothing." As the Eclipse charged toward the dreadnought, the enemy ship unleashed a torrent of firepower. The human ship shook violently as its shields absorbed the brunt of the attack. "Shields at 60%, Hayes reported. "Divert all power to forward defenses," Kane shouted. "We're not stopping." The Eclipse closed the distance, weaving through the dreadnought's defenses. As they approached, Kane gave the final order. "Target their core. Fire everything we've got." The Eclipse's cannons roared, blasting through the dreadnought's outer armor. Explosions rippled across the massive ship as its core destabilized. "We did it," Hayes cheered as the dreadnought began to break apart. The destruction of the dreadnought marked a turning point in the battle. With their flagship gone, the remaining Zoreth ships retreated, their formation shattered. The crew of the Eclipse erupted into cheers, but Kane's expression remained grim. He knew this wasn't the end. The Nexus still loomed, its superweapon nearly operational. This battle had bought them time, but the real fight was still ahead. "Captain," Hayes said softly, "we've won. At least for now." Kane nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "We've won a battle, but the war's far from over. Prepare the ship. We're going after the Nexus. Victory at a cost." The Eclipse emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Zoreth space, its crew battered but resolute. The Nexus loomed ahead, a sprawling fortress of death and destruction. Pulsing with energy, its spires reached out like claws, ready to unleash devastation on the galaxy. This was it, the final stand. Captain Kane stood on the bridge, his jaw tight and his eyes locked on the monstrosity. The destruction of the Zoreth fleet had been a hard-fought victory, but it was clear that the Nexus was ready. If they didn't destroy it now, there wouldn't be a second chance. "Status report," Kane ordered. Lieutenant Hayes checked her console, her face pale. "The Nexus is fully operational. I'm detecting massive energy surges. Its superweapon is primed to fire. If they launch that thing, it'll take out 3 systems in one shot." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew the stakes. There was no room for error. "Weapons systems?" Kane asked. "Fully charged," Malik replied. "But even with everything we got, taking out that thing's core will require precision strikes. And we'll have to be close." Kane nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then we'll get close." The Eclipse approached the Nexus under full cloak, navigating through a web of automated defenses. The closer they got, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The sheer size of the Nexus was overwhelming, its silhouette blotting out the distant stars. "We're within striking range," Hayes reported. "But there's a problem." "Of course there is," Kane muttered. "What is it?" Hayes pointed to the screen, where a new fleet of Zoreth ships was emerging from hyperspace. Dozens of them, all converging on the Nexus. "They must have received reinforcements," Hayes said. "They're locking down the area." Kane clenched his fists. "We'll have to fight our way through." The battle erupted in a blaze of firepower as the Eclipse led the charge. Human stealth ships, scattered across the void, struck from the shadows, disrupting the Zoreth formation. The Eclipse weaved through the chaos, its cannons blazing. "Shields at 50%, Hayes shouted. "We can't take much more of this." "Keep pushing," Kane yelled. "We're not stopping until that thing is gone." The Eclipse closed in on the Nexus, dodging enemy fire and automated turrets. Malik worked frantically to maintain the ship's systems, while Hayes coordinated with the rest of the fleet. "Captain," Malik called, "we've got a problem with the engines. If we take one more direct hit, we're dead in the water." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Then let's make it count. Prepare the payload." The plan was simple but desperate. The Eclipse would deliver a specially designed antimatter bomb directly into the Nexus's core. It was a one-way trip for the bomb, and possibly for them. As they neared the Nexus, the automated defenses intensified. Beams of energy sliced through space, narrowly missing the Eclipse. The ship shook violently, sparks flying from the consoles. "We're taking heavy damage," Hayes shouted. "Just a little further," Kane replied. His hands gripped the console tightly, his knuckles white. "Malik, is the bomb ready?" "Ready and armed," Malik called back. "But we need to manually guide it in. The automated systems won't work under this interference." Kane's stomach churned. He knew what that meant. Someone would have to pilot a smaller craft into the Nexus's core to ensure the bomb hit its target. "I'll do it," Kane said, his voice calm. The bridge fell silent. Hayes turned to him, her eyes wide. "Captain, no, we can find another way." "There's no time," Kane replied. "The longer we wait, the more lives are at risk. This is the only way." Hayes stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Sir, we need you here. You're the reason we've made it this far. We can't lose you." Kane placed a hand on her shoulder. "Hayes, you've been my right hand through all of this. If I don't make it back, you'll lead this crew. I trust you." Before she could protest further, Kane turned and headed to the hangar. The fighter craft launched from the Eclipse, carrying the antimatter bomb. Kane piloted it with precision, dodging the Nexus's defenses as he raced toward its core. The closer he got, the more intense the energy readings became. The air inside the cockpit crackled with static. "This is it," Kane muttered to himself, his heart pounding. No turning back now. The Nexus's core glowed with a blinding light, its energy surging as the superweapon prepared to fire. Kane's fingers danced over the controls, guiding the bomb into position. "Captain," Hayes' voice crackled over the comm, "we're reading massive energy spikes. You have to get out of there." Kane smiled faintly. "Not until the job's done." The bomb locked onto its target, its timer counting down. Kane's hands trembled as he activated the autopilot, setting the craft on a collision course with the core. He barely had time to eject before the bomb detonated. The explosion was cataclysmic. The Nexus's core imploded, sending shockwaves rippling through space. The massive structure collapsed in on itself, its spires crumbling like brittle glass. On the Eclipse, the crew erupted into cheers as the Nexus was destroyed, but their celebration was short-lived. Captain Kane's signal. "It's gone," Hayes said, her voice breaking. Hours later, as the dust settled, the human fleet regrouped. The Zorath forces, leaderless and scattered, retreated into the void. The war wasn't over, but this battle was a turning point. Hayes stood on the bridge, staring out into the vast emptiness. She wore Kane's captain's insignia, her expression somber. "He made his choice," she said quietly, "and we'll honor it. Let's make sure it wasn't in vain." The Eclipse turned toward the distant stars, its crew ready for the battles yet to come. Captain Kane's sacrifice had given them a chance, and they wouldn't waste it.